All right, what's up, everyone? This is Don with Third Creative, and this is a deep dive video into the new multi-sport template I'm calling Heat Check. I'm going to be pretty thorough on this one, and if you're looking for something specific, hopefully you can jump in and scrub through and find what you're looking for and get out. But I want to make sure that everyone is able to get the most out of this template and create the best images possible. So I'm gonna go through every layer, every detail with a fine-tooth comb and hopefully get it all covered. So let's not waste any time. Let's jump into it. I usually like to start with the very bottom of the layer folder, but I guess before we jump into that, it's always a good idea, I'm sure most of you do this when you first open a template, to just look at the layer panel and just turn off some layers, and it just kind of lets you know where everything lives. So obviously you can see this is all of the upper layers. If I turn this off, you can see that this is the lower layers behind your subject. These aren't folders, but you just kind of go through and just see where everything's at. Let's jump into this bottom folder, which is all of these upper layers here, and we'll just start to go through things. Blue indicates something that you can change color of. So I've got change color of background, or change upper background color, excuse me. It's very simple. Double click the box here. You can use this slider to find the general color that you're looking for, and then you can fine tune it. Go darker, more saturated, less saturated. You get the idea. Below it I have fog / smoke layers. I've got 3 of them here. You can turn them off and on to see what they do. And then at the very back I've got a gradient, which is the upper background. So let's talk about this. If you change the color, right now it's set up where it looks really good with this orange, or at least I think it looks good with this orange, but it may not look equally as good with some colors. Like I think this blue right here might be a good example. It's a little too saturated. So, and the reason I say that is because the fog and the smoke doesn't seem to be as prominent. There's a few things that you can do here. Basically this is set to overlay. I don't want to get too technical, but basically anything underneath it, it's applying this color to. You can turn it off and you can see what everything really looks like. I've got different shades of gray and the color applies to it. So each fog layer has its own color overlay, and if you open it up you can see, you know, the gray. Now if you were to select a lighter color, it will make that particular layer show up a little bit more, assuming that what's behind it is darker. If you want it to not be as prominent, you can come lower. You do have the option to actually go into color here. Just keep in mind that whatever you have this turned on is also going to apply to it. So if you want to get super technical with it, you can turn this color overlay off, and you can change the color of each layer separately. This bottom one here, this gradient, if you open it up, we'll click here to open up our gradient editor. This square all the way to the right represents the top. The square to the left represents what's at the bottom. You can see it goes from lighter to darker towards the top. So if we click on this little square here, it'll show us the color that it's set to. Click on that little square and you can see where it is at in your picker. So if you want to create more or less contrast, you can darken the background, or you can lighten the background. You may have seen some of the sample images. I have one of an all-white football uniform, and it almost looks like he's in some kind of snow. So I lighten this background in order to take some of the dark moody drama away and make it a little lighter. So that's pretty thorough and technical, but I just know that some of you are going to get into this color picker and you're just not going to find something that feels and looks right. And so I wanted to explain, some options that you have to fine tune this upper fog area. The next layer that we have is, and actually let's go back to orange, is just a sample school logo. I put it in there. You're not going to use it, obviously, because it's for this particular school, but I want you to see just the option. I have it set at 10% opacity, which, just depends on, how much you want it to show up. But I put that in there just to give you an idea of what that can look like. It's just an extra personal touch. Next, we have upper background embers, and I say background because we also have foreground embers. These background embers are placed behind your upper subject, and the foreground embers are obviously in front. So they are all set to overlay, and they are set at 100% opacity. You can play around with it, maybe soft light or reduce opacity if you don't want them to be so prominent. But some of my sample images, I actually went in and turned them all off. And especially with this logo here, that doesn't look too bad. So it's just another option, embers or no embers. Control the opacity. You can actually move them around. So if you don't like where they're sitting, you could actually scale them up and down, move them around. You can really fine tune this thing. Next, we have our upper subject. In parentheses, I have double image option. One good thing about this template, obviously, it looks really good as a double image. I think it looks probably best that way, but it can also serve as single image. And if you do a single image, you have the option to have your single image in this fog/smoke area, or you could turn it off and you can have your single image down here. Just scale them up to fill the space. Let's see, you would place your subject images in this upper subject folder. I went ahead and just left all the layers so you can kind of see what I've done here. I've added some color. I've got a blend mode set to color. I've painted some color in to her hair. So you can kind of see I would just use a brush at very low opacity, select a surrounding color, and just kind of paint it in. I'm not going to get into blend if, but that's an extra added. I'm going to get into it real quick. You can see that I've separated these sliders to kind of control where the color is applying to. It just looks a little more natural. I have some dodge and burn layers, which you can kind of see if I turn them off. It doesn't do a ton, but it kind of enhances the highlights and the darks as well. If you notice here, there's drop shadow attached to your subject folder. I turned it off by default because it's not going to look right unless you fine tune it. So if you drop your subjects in here and you don't like the way that it looks, but right here you can kind of see it serves as just kind of an outer glow. So you can turn that on and double click the drop shadow. And opacity is 100%. More than likely, you're probably going to want to drag it down a little bit, but you can play around with this and see what looks good. It just kind of creates a little more separation. It's just an added touch, but it also works without it. By default, it is turned off. Clip to your subject folder, I have a levels adjustment. Now this one is a big one as far as fine tuning. You can drop your subjects in here and it will apply the level adjustment to what I thought looked good for this particular subject, this color, but it's not a one size fits all. It's up here in my properties window, you can kind of see basically all that it is I've reduced the whites down to 225 by dragging this over, and it just kind of makes the foreground subject stand out more. This is what's featured. This is more of a background, And if I turn that off, you can see it pops a lot more. Another reason you couldn't see the dodging and burning as much is because I had that turned on. But this is something you'll want to fine tune. So some images you may want to reduce the whites and reduce the blacks a little bit. In this case, it doesn't look too good, but in some of my sample images that I created, I did just that. But you can play around with levels and just see what looks good to you based on the color, you know, how light or how dark it is. And a lot of things come into play, the color of their uniform, the color of the background. But that's what this is, and by default it just brings those whites down so it doesn't pop as much as the lower subject. Next we have color grade upper subject. This is a big one too, because if I turn this off, that doesn't look near as good. And this is a very simple color grading technique that I've used a lot just because it is simple. You can possibly get better results with doing a more complex method, but this is just simply a color layer, color overlay layer, but it's set to soft light blend mode. And I have the opacity reduced to 50%. But like this levels adjustment, this color grade is something that you're going to want to fine tune to your subjects, your colors. So you'll notice if I turn it off, not only does it take that warm color away, but it loses a little bit of contrast. So that's one thing. It adds color to your image, which helps it fit the scene and the background, but it also adds a little bit of contrast. If you change this to overlay, you get a lot of contrast, and I think that's probably too much, but you can always reduce it. So if you want more pop, you can go with overlay. If you don't want so much contrast, stick with soft light, and then you would just fine tune the level of opacity that you think looks good, which I think I was around the 50%. To change this, you can just double click here. You can play around with it. I mean, if you're working with like a green or purple, I mean, really anything works, but I think quite often you would go with shades of orange and yellow to warm it up, or shades of blue to purplish to cool it down. I have a few sample images where I've done this. But you can kind of see I can go more red. You can see what it does, you know. But the main thing is to find what fits for the color scheme that is behind the subject. And so that's why I have this orange. Now you can go with less saturation. You can come down and into the darker shades and find what you think looks good. So it's just a little bit of finessing, but it goes a long, long way in your end result and making sure that it looks good. One other thing, gosh, there's just so much I want to explain. Another trick is if you have an image that's mostly blues, you're probably going to want to switch to a cooler color. Obviously, it doesn't look good in this particular background. But you will lose a lot of the warmth. And so, in fact, I should have been better prepared, but let me actually show you what I'm talking about, which I think I can get to it pretty quickly. If you go with blue, you're going to lose some of that warmth. It's going to be super cool. And that may not be exactly the look that you want. So, as I'm still fumbling for this sample image, which I almost have, where'd you go? There you are. Okay. Whoops, that's not what I meant to do. Try again. I really need to take time to come up with a game plan before I start these videos. So this sample image specifically, I applied the blue, but I lost a lot of the warmth. And so what I did is duplicate this layer. So you can right click and you can duplicate it. or actually on Mac, which that actually didn't work, but on Mac I just hold down Option. Oh, I see what the problem is. A little pop-up window on my other screen. So it did work, but hold down Option, click and drag down to see the blue line. You've got 2. So now you can apply a cooler color, and obviously this doesn't look right here, but when you look at the sample image, this is the look that I was getting. I left a little bit of yellow and orange, and I also had a blue shade in there, and I fine-tuned the opacities, and I got it just right. So like I said, this is super thorough. I just really want everyone to know all the little tricks that you can use to get the best image possible. Next we have foreground color fade over subject. So if you turn it off, you can see what happens. So it's got a gradient mask attached to it. Very simple. You just want to try to match what you have the background set to. So you can come in here and play around with different colors, different shades, saturation, lightness, darkness. You get the idea. Pretty simple. If you want the fade to be lower or higher, this little chain link, if you click that, you can unlock the mask, and then as long as you have your move tool, you can click and drag. Well, that wouldn't work, but you can click and drag down on the bottom without moving the whole thing. The other option is to actually use your gradient tool, which is not something everybody is familiar with, but it's super easy. If you go to your gradient tool and you just make sure you have black to white or white to black, and you select this mask, you can hold down Shift, click and drag, wrong way, and you can just set it how you like. 2 different ways to do that. Let's see, what else do we have? Foreground embers, we've kind of covered that already. I think that pretty much covers everything on the upper layers folder. So let's go back just to make sure it looks as it did originally. Okay, so we've got lower layers now. Once you turn that off, you can see what we're working with. Let's look at this. We've got another subfolder. Let's open that up too. We want to see everything here. All right, so if we go all the way to the bottom, we have light flare right and left. And if you kind of look along the side here, you can kind of see, I'll turn them off, turn them on. You can move them up, move them down. You can, they're set at 40% opacity. So after you edit your color for the background and you get everything right, you can play with those if you want to get them to look just right. But that's what those are. This is the main layer that you would change your background color for the lower portion. So you can see it's masked off to not apply to the upper area. Color overlay, click on it, click on this box, and you can kind of go around, find the color that you're looking for. Next in this folder here, you can see is vertical stripe options. If you open it up, we've got wide stripes and we've got pinstripes. Currently wide stripes is turned on. We can turn it off, turn on pinstripes. This is pretty simple. You can apply the color same way with the color overlays. You just pick which one that you want. The big detail here is if you want to adjust the size of the pinstripe, you'll want to click, or the big stripes, the wide stripes, you want to click on the chain link to unlock the layer mask. And whichever one you're working with, select the layer mask, use the move tool. It's pretty big, so you want to maybe pan out a little bit. And I'm going to hold down Shift, click in the corner. Actually, I'm going to hold down Shift and Option on a Mac. And I'm just going to click and... Actually, I'm telling you this backwards. Don't select the layer mask. Select the layer with the layer mask unlocked, but same thing. I'm hold down Shift and Option on Mac and scale out. It just holds it in place, and you can make them as big as you want. You can actually make them really small and narrow. Just another way to fine tune it. Same thing applies to these stripes, which I won't do. But yeah, you can see that's kind of a cool look right there. Not with the pinstripes on, but yeah, you'll want to set the color to your stripes, so that it looks good with the background color that you've selected. All right. Next, let's see, we have a same thing with the vertical stripes. We've got a gradient mask, which just makes it fade towards the bottom. You can adjust that the same way that I already covered, with the other gradient mask. Next, we have your V stripe. If you turn that off and on, you can see what that is. Color overlay right here. That's how you're going to change the color of it. It's got a bevel and an emboss, which if you want to open that up, you can control the opacity, you can control the size, but more than likely you'll want to leave that like it is. The important thing here is I have drop shadows which show up here, which I felt was set to a level that looked good with this dark, almost black, dark gray background. If you go with something super light, more than likely these drop shadows are going to be too dark, too prominent. So you will want to jump in here. It's very easy. There's two different ones, and if I take time to zoom in, you can see if I turn off the top one, it's kind of a smaller, darker shadow here. I've got an extra one for a longer, softer cast shadow. So you can come into either of them and just reduce the opacity. You can also reduce the distance and size. You can play around with it so that it's not too dark or not too light based on the color or the shade that you're using in the background. Clip to it, I have a texture overlay, and let's see here. That's actually, I'm sorry, we have an actual folder for all of the lower V layers, which you turn it off, you see you lose everything. But this texture overlay, it is set to multiply at 100%. You can reduce opacity, play with blend modes, but more than likely you'll want to leave it like it is. You can kind of see in there what it does, and it applies to everything except for the text. You can see inside the text that the texture is not there, which is by design, which brings us to our next layers, which are the text layers. What I like to do to change the color is hold down Shift and just select both at the same time. Come up to my properties. You can also come to character, either or, and then select the color that you want. To change the text, we would double click in the T box, and I have it set up so that the orientation on this side starts left to right, as you can see up here, and then the other one is right to left. So it should just start here at the bottom of the V, and you can type the repeating text that you want until it fills up the entire space. Once it does, you're good to go. The easiest way to do the other side is just to double click, highlight everything, Control or Command C to copy it, or you can right click and then come up to your other text layer, do the same thing, get it highlighted, and then we would do Control or Command V to just paste it in place. You can use your move tool with your mouse or your pen or your up and down arrows on your key to move this around if you need to, but it should fall into place the way that I have it set up. It also has an inner shadow, which is super subtle, but just to give it a little dimension. That can be adjusted if you feel that it needs it. Let's see what else we have. We've got lower background fog layers. So this is a good one. I've got them in a folder. You can see there's 3 layers here. So I say they're background because they are behind the subject. I do have some in front of the lower subject, which we'll get to. But if we turn this off, you can see that those more subtle layers disappear. So with these, you can scale them up and down. You can move them around. You can play around with it. But if you want to just apply a blanket color, which is on there currently, you would double click this color overlay on the group folder, and then you can change the color to anything that you want that looks good. If you want to control them in a little more detail, you can turn this color overlay off, and then you can go through each separate layer and control them. You can stick with the shades of gray and white, or you can start to get in the color. but that would allow you to make them either brighter or darker to give you the amount of contrast that you want. And so otherwise, this is just set to overlay, and whatever you have in this folder will just blanket apply to everything. And that is the lower layers. This color grade is supposed to be clipped to that, so I might have to look into that. So this color grade applies to all of the lower layers, and if I turn it off, you can just see it lose some of its warmth. This is not a layer that you're always going to want to use. In this case, I'm using like gray, and I wanted to add a little bit of warmth to it. I've got the opacity only at 10%, so you know, you could go with a higher opacity or a lower opacity, and you can just kind of use the slider to find a point that you think looks good, gives you the right amount of color grading, almost like the color from the upper area here is kind of casting onto the lower area. Hopefully that makes sense. Next we have some exposure and levels vignetting. If we turn these off, you can see it kind of flattens everything out. And there are some instances where you may want to turn these off. If you're going with, you know, super high key, bright white, you might want to turn these off. You have some options. You can always reduce the opacity, but you can also go into the levels, and you can see I've got the blacks enhanced, so you can play with those. Let's look at exposure. See, I've got it reduced. You can play with that, darker, lighter. This is a big one because depending on how light or bright or what color you have, you may not want it as dark, or you may want it darker. But you may want to adjust that. Another thing is that you can click on any of these corners and bring it closer, further away, wider on the sides, and tighter. Not necessarily something everybody's going to want to take the time to do, but the more time you take, the better result you're going to get. And so I wanted to explain that little technique, or that little option that you have. Same thing for both of them. So you can play with the actual settings of the levels and the exposure. You can just adjust the opacity of each layer. You can leave it as is, or you can scale these up and down, or bring them in tighter. Just some fine-tuning options. Next we have lower or single subject options. So we'll open that up. You just basically drop your subject in here. Again, I've got all of my layers in here just so you can see, you know, how I have it set up to get this particular look. I have another one in here. If we turn this one off, just to kind of show you like what a single image one would look like, we'd probably want to go down here and turn off this subject. But it's just an example. These are layers you probably want to delete, but it just kind of demonstrates the two different options you have for a single or double image. So pretty self-explanatory. Drop your subjects in here. Common question I get is the gradient mask. Something is showing through their legs, or they want it to fade out lower or higher. So again, you can just click on this little chain link here, and you can stretch your mask up, down, or you can use your gradient tool to just redo the mask altogether. I have a saturation boost, which is optional. I just thought it was nice to have it in there. It just kind of gives it a little saturation punch, but it's just a hue saturation adjustment layer that you can go in and really fine tune if you want to work with just your reds or your yellows, or you can turn it off, you can increase it, decrease it. Maybe you want a more desaturated look, but it's in there at plus 10 saturation by default. You can always turn it off. This color grading lower subject is basically the same as the one that we went over for the upper subject. It's just not at 50% opacity. It's lower. It's at 25%. I didn't want quite as much of an effect, but you can adjust the opacity and you can adjust the color, and and you can even turn it off. It just depends on your image. All the sample images I've made, I left it on, and I either went with cool or warm, and I just kind of played with the amount of opacity to get the look that I want. Next we have foreground fog over the lower subject, change color, which you will just double click on the color overlay and click on this box. This is one that can be moved up and down. You can scale it larger, shift option on Mac. You can make it bigger, move it around, whatever you need to do. You can apply color, all kinds of cool options. And pretty easy. And you can adjust the opacity if you want it more transparent. You got options there. Next we have lower text layer. Let's take a look at that. So let's see, pretty self-explanatory. I guess let's start at the top. The top is last name or this primary text. It has an arch applied to it. If you don't want the arch applied, just double click this T box here, and you will come up to this little icon. We'll click on it. Right now you can see it's set to arch. It's a warp text box. You can come up here to none, or you can adjust the amount, or you can go with a completely different effect. But I imagine some of you may not want the arch. Some of you will. I like the way that it looked. On here there is a bevel emboss. So this is a good one. The color is actually set to gradient. I'm jumping around. Color. Let's talk about color. It's a gradient overlay. So if I double click that, you can see the gradient that I'm using. If you don't want to bother with a gradient, just turn it off, and it becomes a solid color that you can change up here. It doesn't look as good. That's just my opinion. Stick with a gradient. Come in here, click on this box, and basically the left is the lower color, the right is the higher color, and I've got all these crazy gradients saved in here, but it just adds more dimension. It just looks better. But you know, you might get something where you don't really like the amount of, whoops. You might not like the amount of opacity for the bevel emboss. So you can come in here and you can adjust that as well. You can reduce that. So you can see the highlight gets a little less prominent. You can make the lows darker, lighter, something that you can adjust depending on what color that you go with. There is a stroke on there that is turned off, but if you turn it on, you can kind of see you have the option to add just a stroke outline. Now, if I really zoom in, you can see what's happening here. Let's double click on it to look at it. It's set at level 10. You can bring it up. You can bring it down. You can change the color here to anything you want. And you can play with it and just see if you like the look better than without it. By default, it is turned off. It has a drop shadow. So again, if you change the colors and that drop shadow is too dark, too bold, just come in here and reduce the opacity, or you can reduce the size and the distance as well and get it to your liking. Next we have our first name, which is pretty simple. It's gradient overlay by default, but again, that can be turned off for just a solid color. You can change the color in the properties or the character, either or, if you're not using the gradient. If you are using the gradient, it's the same as the last name. It also has a drop shadow. Then we have our subtext. The subtext, I have very simple. It's just solid color. There's no drop shadow, nothing else. It's just there. One thing I did find in some of my sample images was that it wasn't bold enough, and so you may want to come up and hit bold, and you may not. In this case, bright orange on a very dark gray, it stands out just fine the way that it is. So the next three layers are what what I use to get this little plate down here. So we've got a texture over the plate, and the layer mask here is what just restricts it to this area. And so if you move that around, you just want to make sure that you select all three of these layers. If you scale it larger, smaller, if you do anything with it, just make sure you're doing it all together so that this layer mask will stick with the other two layers and apply correctly. But if we zoom in, you can kind of see this texture. You can play with the opacity if you want more or less. But it just applies a little bit of grunge. You've got your year, and so obviously you can change that, change the color just up here in your character panel or properties. Let's see, down here is just a shape layer, which is where we get this plate from, and it is a gradient, and so you'll want to use a gradient to change the color the same way all the other gradients that I went over. But you also have the option for just solid color overlay. If you want to simplify it, just turn on color overlay, and then you just have to pick one color. It just loses a little dimension, in my opinion. Is that it? I think that's it. Goodness. There's just so much that I want to explain, and I know that I don't want to overcomplicate it, and you don't necessarily have to do everything that I explain to your images if you need to get in and get out a lot quicker. But for those of you who want to take a little bit of extra time, I wanted to make sure that I went over all of those, fine details, things that I did in order to get the sample images that I created and get the best look that I felt that I could get out of it. So I think we'll go over a couple more things and we'll try to wrap this thing up. Actually, there is one last thing that I want to touch on this vertical file, which is what to do if you want to use this as a single image. More specifically, how to adjust the height of all these lower V layers. So for the sake of this example, let's turn off this lower one and say that we're going to use the upper. And you can see that we've got kind of some just dead space here that just doesn't look right. So it's pretty simple. You'll just want to make sure you have the lower layers folder selected. Make sure you have your move tool. And you can really just use your arrow down key. It's a little bit slow, so if you want to pan out and click on an anchor, hold down shift, you can click and drag down. Get it to the height that you like and commit. And so right now, obviously, the foreground color fade over subject doesn't look right. So let's zoom in a little bit. It's this layer right here. So we can actually move it. Well, we wouldn't want to do it like that. What we'd want to do is click on the chain link to unlock it and select the layer mask and click and drag down on this bottom portion here. And you can get it to the height that you like. Of course, you always have the option to just go to your gradient tool and redo the gradient if you want to really get it precise. That's always an option as well. But that is how you would adjust the height. Very simple. Just wanted to touch on that. So I think next we want to take a look at the Memory Mate. So on the Memory Mate, for anyone who isn't familiar with how my Memory Mates are set up or how to use them, I want to just touch on it real quick. I have a dedicated Memory Mate file, and when you open it up, you'll see these red folders. The first one is for your subject image, so you can open that up. Got a sample subject image in there. You would just drag and drop your subjects into this folder, and you would scale and position them. The other red folder here that we have here is where the team image lives. So if you're to the point where you're making Memory Mates, I assume you've already created a team image, but to do that, you would start with your 5x4 team file, create your team image, save it as a JPEG, and once you're to the point of making Memory Mates, you will open this folder, highlight or select the sample, and then I've got it on my other screen here, but let's use our imagination. This is the same exact photo, but let's say that it's not. You'll drag and drop it in here. Now you can scale and position your team image, and if you want it bigger or more to the right or the left, you can do that, but scale and position your team image over the existing one. The sample image you can turn off or you can delete. It is in a folder that has a drop shadow that creates a little dimension here. You can turn that off or adjust it if you need to. The subject folder also has a drop shadow. I have it turned off because I felt like it didn't look right having a shadow over what is, you know, this foggy background. It doesn't seem to look realistic, but it is there if you want to use it. And that is pretty much it. I guess one other thing that I could cover is, let's say, for example, your subject, or you have subjects that are facing in the opposite direction. So let's flip him, and you don't want his back to it. Pretty simple. We would just want to position your subjects on the opposite side. And to get everything else over, the way I would do it is select the top layer for lower text, and then hold down Command or Control and select this bottom red folder, the Insert 5x4 Team Image. Now you have them selected together, and by moving them together it will keep them aligned properly. You can still move them separate if you want to. You just don't have to worry about keeping the text lined up with the center point of your team image. Now if you have memory-made images that are both left and right, you need to be making both. You could even go as far as to duplicate both of these folders, label one left, label one right, and then just toggle back and forth, you know, to make them in different orientations. And that's pretty much it. The thing about having a dedicated memory-mate file, it just means you have to take the time to re-customize the colors, which, you know, time is money. So in all honesty, I would probably not use the dedicated memory-mate file. It's in there just because so many people have requested it. If it were me, I'll show you one more thing, the way that I would do it, and it's a lot easier. And that is to use the 5x4 team image and just create your memory-mate out of that. Since you've already customized all the colors, all you would want to do is go in and turn off some layers. Starting with lower text, we'd want to turn off the red folders, which include the subjects, and let's turn off this middle text. And so we get something that looks like this. Now come back up and select this lower text layer at the top. Now you can come over to the dedicated memory-mate file, and whether you have already inserted your images or not, which let's say you're just working with these sample images, you'll want to select the same folders here. We've got both red folders selected, and by holding down Command or Control you can click on different ones to include them. Let's go ahead and include the saturation and the color grade. So we've got these 5 layers, excuse me, layers/layer folders selected. Now all we have to do is drag and drop. And now I'm going to click an anchor point here, and then just click anywhere in here, and you can move everything into place. Now the one final step, just to make it set up the way that it is to come down to this lower foreground fog layer, click and drag and move it up till you see the little blue line just under the top layer folder. Let go, and now it's in the right position. Now you've got your memory-mate, and you didn't have to go through and change all the colors and stripes and text on this background part. Hopefully that will save you a lot of time that way. Okay, I think that's finally it. I know this is a long one, they usually are. A lot of this might be just more information than most of you need. Some of you are going to want to get in, get out very quickly, do the bare minimum, and I totally get that. I will say the more you put into customizing it, the better the final image is going to be, and that is why I take the time to be super thorough and try to cover anything and everything, all the little minor details that will help you get the best final result. Hopefully, you know, give you the best image and make you the most profits. So I think that is all. If I have forgotten anything or didn't cover something that you have questions about, feel free to shoot me an email, don@thirdcreative.com. It's time to move on to the next one. So that's all I have for now. Until next time, we'll see you.